Hi, I'm Melanie, and this is Unfashioned, a podcast about unraveling what no longer fits and re wearing what was always real. As we move deeper into the holiday season, everything around us seems to get louder. There are more opinions, more expectations, and more pressure to show up, keep up, and package ourselves in ways that feel presentable and approved. Before the year closes, I wanted to pause here with you for one final episode before January and talk about something that quietly shapes so many of our choices. Trends that could influence the things we wear, the ways we are told to live, who we are told to be, and how we should look, and how easily we are pulled towards blending in, especially during this holiday season. This episode is about that emotional part of your closet that you reach into every day and how trends can influence your choices. How you can trust your own voice to choose what fits, not because it's popular or accepted, but because it's true. This will be the final episode of the season. I will be taking a pause for the holidays and returning in January with new stories, new layers, and more unraveling. I am so glad you are here. So let's begin. Trends move fast now. They move faster than intuition, faster than discernment, and faster than our own ability to decide what actually belongs to us. From a fashion designer's point of view, it really hasn't always been this way. Trends once moved slowly. They unfolded over years, sometimes even decades. A silhouette had time to become familiar. A look had time to settle into culture, identity, and memory. Style used to linger. Designers would set a direction, magazines would interpret it, and the people would choose what resonated with them. There was no expectation to wear everything or to change consistently. You could adopt a piece, live in it, and allow it to become your own. Technology changed the rhythm entirely. Social media has collapsed time. Influencers have replaced editors. Algorithms have replaced intuition. What we now call trends are often nothing more than micro trends that appear suddenly and disappear just as quickly, sometimes before we even decide whether they feel right on our bodies or in our lives. A trend today does not ask whether you belong in it, it assumes you will follow. It suggests that if you do not keep up, you will be left behind. And that is where it becomes dangerous. This does not mean trends should be ignored entirely, especially when we are choosing pieces for our personal closet. Trends can still be noticed, they can still be observed, but they never were meant to be the foundations of what we keep for ourselves. When you're building or rebuilding your closet, either emotionally or physically, trends should be informational, not instructional. They can offer context for what is happening in the world, but they should always be filtered through your own life, your own body, and your own sense of self. The question is not whether something is trending, but whether it belongs in your closet. A personal closet is not meant to be a collection of what is current. It is meant to reflect who you are right now. When trends lead that process, closets fill quickly but feel empty. When listening inward leads, even a small closet can feel complete. Trends are seductive because they feel like shortcuts. They resemble maps. They promise to belong without requiring self knowledge. They offer approval before you have even asked yourself what you want. But belonging was never something you could wear. Every time we follow a trend without pausing to check with ourselves, we hand over a little authority. We trade curiosity for conformity. Slowly and quietly, we begin dressing for the crowd instead of dressing for ourselves. That is the pulse of a trend now. It is fast, loud, persuasive, and always asking you to look outward instead of inward. When trends move this quickly, they stop feeling optional. They begin to feel like instructions. I know this not just as an observer, but from inside the fashion industry itself. When I was working as a fashion designer, there was always an unspoken expectation to know every current trend, to wear them, to reference them, and to discuss them fluently. Being in the know was part of the uniform. Relevance mattered. At first, I loved it. I loved the energy, the creativity, and the constant stimulation. But over time, the pressure to stay current turned into noise. Living and working in New York City amplified everything: the pace, the buzz, the comparison, the constant sense that something new was always happening somewhere else. Trends did not shape wardrobes, they shaped conversations, careers, and identities. Every season brought a new expectation, new aesthetics, new ways to signal belonging. And slowly, without realizing it, I began filling my emotional closet with versions of myself that were shaped by what was trending instead of what was true. That environment rewards conformity. It calls it sophistication and frames it as ambition. But the more I followed it, the further I drifted from myself. I felt it in my body before I could name it in words. I felt relentless fatigue and a quiet dissatisfaction that no amount of trend awareness could solve. What I did not realize at the time was how rarely I was listening to myself. I was informed, I was current, but I was really disconnected. I was letting the volume of the industry decide what mattered instead of asking myself what felt right in my own life. It wasn't until I committed to a consistent yoga and meditation practice that the noise finally softened. Sitting still, breathing calmly, and listening inward revealed something simple and kind of uncomfortable. All of that external stimulation was not making me happy. What brought me back was not the next trend, it was slowing down. It was learning to trust my own rhythm. It was rediscovering my personal style that was for me, and that was vintage clothing. Vintage did not rush me, it did not demand reinvention. It allowed me to choose pieces with history, character, and soul. Pieces that felt like conversations instead of commands. That rediscovery changed everything. It was not just about the clothing anymore. It was about identity and self trust, not following conformity or chasing what was next, but honoring what felt real. Finding my way back to myself required learning how to listen inward again, not to trends, not to expectations, and not to the versions of myself being sold to me, but the quieter voice that had been there all along. Once you experience that kind of alignment, it becomes impossible to unsee how much conformity is driven by trends instead of truth. I began to see that trends are not simply about style or taste, but about influence. They are systems designed to capture attention, shape behavior, and encourage consistent consumption. Trends thrive on noise, and noise is profitable. The faster trends move, the more they ask of us: more engagement, more purchases, and more reinvention. They are built to keep us feeling slightly behind and always in need of the next version of ourselves. Over time, this shows up very clearly in our closets. We open the door and see rows of clothing that technically fit but do not feel like us anymore. Pieces chosen for moments, moods, or versions of ourselves that were shaped by what was trending at the time. Clothing collected in response to pressure instead of intention. Trends are not neutral, they are created to sell, and what they sell most effectively is not clothing, but identity. Every trend suggests a version of who you could be if you buy more relevant, more polished, more desired, and more worthy. When those messages are repeated often enough, they begin to feel personal. And this is how conformity becomes monetized. At first, participating feels harmless. You try the look, you follow the formula, you tell yourself it's just fashion. But trends rarely stay contained. They influence how we define our success, how we imagine happiness, and how we measure ourselves. Slowly, your closet fills faster than your sense of clarity. You stop choosing what reflects you and start choosing what keeps you current. This is not failure of self awareness. This is the result of saturation. When money is tied to conformity, self trust becomes inconvenient. Slowing down feels risky. Listening inward feels insufficient. And over time, the inner voice that once guided your style becomes harder to hear. When trends sell us identities, validation becomes rewarded with compliance. We begin looking outward for confirmation that we are doing it right through compliments, approval, attention, and recognition. Even our closet becomes performative. We dress for response instead of resonance. But validation is not happiness, it is a temporary substitute. External approval may offer a quick sense of reassurance, but it never creates stability. It fades quickly and demands more effort, more spending, more self adjustment, and eventually that cycle becomes exhausting. Happiness comes from alignment, not admiration. It comes from choosing what feels true rather than what looks impressive. It comes from knowing yourself well enough to say no to trends and to pressure, to versions of yourself that no longer fit. Rebuilding your personal style begins the same way rebuilding your inner world does. You slow down, you take inventory, you look at what you already own and ask honest questions. Does this feel like me? Do I reach for this naturally? Do I feel grounded when I wear it? Does this support who I am now? This is how a personal closet is rebuilt, not through trend reports, but through self trust. This does not mean that trends disappear completely. It means they no longer lead. When you are rebuilding your personal closet, trends can be observed, considered, and even appreciated, but they are filtered through your own lens. You get to decide what supports your life, your body, and your identity right now, and what does not. Trends become information, not instruction. They become optional, not authoritative. You can acknowledge them without surrendering to them. And when a trend genuinely aligns with who you are, it is chosen consciously, not out of pressure or fear of being left behind. Through choosing pieces that reflect your rhythm, your values, and your life as it exists, clothing becomes an extension of your inner alignment instead of a costume for the outside world. When you stop listening to trends and start listening to yourself, something shifts. Your closet gets quieter. Your choices get clearer. Your confidence stops needing witnesses. That is where real happiness lives. Not in approval, but integrity. Not in conformity, but in authenticity. And once you experience that, you realize that no trend can give you what your own voice already holds. As we move into the final week before the holidays and the new year, the noise gets louder. There's pressure to look festive, to show up in certain ways, and to feel joyful, polished, and put together. There are trends for how to dress, how to celebrate, how to reflect, and even how to become a new version of yourself before the calendar turns. I want to invite you to slow this moment down. The next time you open your closet this week, pause before you reach for anything. Take a moment to really look at what is there, not with judgment and not with urgency, but with honesty. Ask yourself which pieces you reach for because they feel comforting and familiar, and which ones you reach for because you feel like you should. Notice where the pressure of the season shows up. Consider whether you are dressing to meet expectations, to fit a mood, or to prove that you are doing the holidays correctly. Then notice how it feels when you choose pieces that allow you to breathe, move, and feel like yourself. As you move through the rest of the year, pay attention to these same patterns beyond clothing. Notice where the season asks you to perform. Notice where you feel the pull to be trendy, impressive, or resolved before January arrives. Notice how often that pressure pulls you away from your own inner rhythm. You do not need a new version of yourself for the new year. You do not need a new wardrobe, a new identity, or a perfect ending to this year. You need to remain present and continue listening inward. Personal style, like happiness, is not something you buy or perform. It is something you return to. Every time you choose what feels true over what feels expected, especially a season that asks so much of you, you are quietly reclaiming your own voice. As we close this story, I hope you feel a little less pressure to keep up and a little more permission to listen inward. Trends will continue to move quickly, especially during this season, but you do not have to move with them. You are allowed to slow down, to choose intentionally, and to trust what feels true to you. This is the final story before we pause for the holidays and the new year. Thank you for listening and for being here and for taking this journey of unraveling alongside of me. I am so grateful for the time you have spent with these stories. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to share it with a friend who might also be feeling the noise and the pressure of this season. You can follow Unfashioned and leave a review on your favorite streaming platform, as it truly helps the podcast reach others who may need these conversations. I will be back in January with new stories, new layers, and more space to continue this work of letting go of what no longer fits and re-wearing what was always real. Until then, take good care of yourself, listen to your own voice, and choose what feels honest as you move into the new year.